The galaxy was vast and filled with countless alien races, each with their own cultures, technologies, and histories. Some civilizations thrived, while others fell into ruin. But in a remote corner of the galaxy, there was a species that had been forgotten by all. The Zarkan were an ancient race, once powerful and wise, but now they were alone. Every alliance they had formed, every promise made by other civilizations, had been broken. The galaxy had abandoned them. For years, the Zarkan had lived in peace on their beautiful homeworld, their advanced technology keeping them safe. But peace did not last forever. A brutal alien warlord known as Krath and his fierce army had set their sights on the Zarkan. His goal was simple: to conquer their planet and wipe out their people. No one in the galaxy cared enough to help. The Zarkan were seen as a lost cause, their once great civilization reduced to a shadow of its former self. Meanwhile, a human exploration ship, the Endeavor, was on a routine mission to chart new stars. The ship's crew was made up of brave men and women, soldiers, engineers, and scientists, all eager to explore the unknown reaches of space. Their journey had been uneventful until they stumbled upon a distress signal. It was weak, nearly lost in the vastness of space, but it was unmistakable. The signal was coming from the Zarkan homeworld. Captain Ava Lawson, the leader of the Endeavor, stood in front of the ship's communication panel. She had heard the rumors about the Zarkan, their long history, their tragic fall, and the galactic betrayal. But this distress signal was something else entirely. It wasn't just a call for help. It was a cry for survival. "Captain, it's definitely from the Zarkan. They need our help," said Lieutenant Mark Harper, the ship's chief communications officer. He turned to Ava, his expression serious. "The Krath are attacking them. It's a full-scale invasion." Ava frowned, her mind racing. They were far from any friendly fleet, and no other civilization had ever shown any interest in the Zarkan's plight. No one would come to their aid. But Ava couldn't ignore the situation. She had seen too many innocents suffer because others chose to turn a blind eye. "We can't just leave them to die," Ava said, determination in her voice. "Prepare the crew. We're going to help them, no matter what it takes." The crew of the Endeavor worked swiftly, setting a course for the Zarkan homeworld. As the ship entered the Zarkan system, the sight that greeted them was both beautiful and terrifying. The planet was covered in lush forests and vast oceans, but above it, a cloud of destruction loomed. Krath warships filled the sky, firing upon the planet below. Zarkan cities were burning, their once proud civilization crumbling under the weight of the Krath's assault. "We need to act fast," said Commander Liam Brooks, the ship's tactical officer. "If we don't intervene, they'll be wiped out in a matter of hours." Ava nodded. She turned to the crew, her eyes full of resolve. "We've been called to this moment. We may be the only ones who can make a difference." The Endeavor descended into the atmosphere, preparing to land in one of the few remaining safe zones. The Zarkan, despite their advanced technology, had been caught off guard. Their once impenetrable defenses were now shattered. The humans would have to fight alongside them to ensure their survival. As the ship landed, the crew was greeted by a small group of Zarkan soldiers. Their leader, a tall, dignified figure named Vorton, stepped forward to meet them. He looked weary, but his eyes still burned with the fire of determination. "You are the humans," Vorton said, his voice deep and resonant. "Why have you come? We are already beyond help." Ava stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "We've come to help. We can't stand by and watch you die. We'll fight with you. Together, we can drive the Krath off your world." Vorton looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing, as if deciding whether to trust these strangers. Finally, he spoke again. "If you truly wish to fight with us, then you will need to act quickly. The Krath are merciless. They will stop at nothing to see us destroyed." "We're ready," Captain Ava replied. "We've trained for situations like this. We'll stand by you until the end." The Jarkan, although skeptical, knew they had no choice. Their civilization was on the brink of extinction, and the humans were the only ones who had shown up to help. Together, they would face the Krath. And though it seemed like an impossible fight, the spark of hope had been lit. Humans and Jarkan, two races with little in common, were now united by a single goal: survival. As the Endeavor's crew began to prepare for battle, Ava couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision. They had no idea what they were walking into, but one thing was clear: they were no longer just explorers. They were defenders of an entire species, and they would fight to the last breath. The battle for the Jarkan homeworld had begun. As the Endeavor's crew prepared for their first fight alongside the Jarkan, Captain Ava Lawson couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much larger than she had anticipated. The Krath were a ruthless, powerful enemy, and the Jarkan, despite their advanced technology, had been weakened over time. This mission would test the humans like never before. After landing on the planet, the crew quickly joined forces with the Jarkan soldiers. Vorten, their leader, had given them a brief rundown of the situation, but the details were grim. The Krath had attacked in waves, and the Jarkan defenses were already stretched thin. Many of their cities had already fallen, and the remaining population had retreated to the underground bunkers, hoping to survive long enough for help to arrive. The humans, though few in number, were determined to give everything they had. They couldn't just sit back and watch the Jarkan die. Ava knew that if they failed, the galaxy would lose a species with untapped potential, one that could have offered invaluable knowledge and technology. But even more than that, she knew they had to help because it was the right thing to do. "Captain Lawson," Vorten called out as she surveyed the battlefield, "we appreciate your help, but are you sure your people are ready for this? We're dealing with an enemy unlike any you've faced before." Ava met his gaze firmly. "We don't turn away from a fight, especially when people need us. We're here to stay." The Jarkan watched the humans carefully, unsure of what to expect. Their race had been betrayed by other civilizations before, and they had grown wary of outside help. The last time they had trusted others, their allies had turned their backs when the Krath came. Now, they weren't sure they could afford to trust anyone again. But the humans seemed different. They weren't here to take control of their planet or exploit their resources. They were here simply to fight and protect. And that, Vorten realized, was something the Jarkan hadn't seen in a long time. "We've never fought alongside another race before," Vorten said quietly, "but you've earned our trust. We'll need to work together if we're going to have a chance." Ava nodded. "We'll figure it out as we go. Let's start by gathering intel. We need to know where the Krath are concentrated." The two forces, humans and Jarkan, began to work together, exchanging tactics, weapons, and strategies. The Jarkan were masters of advanced technology, and their cities were equipped with defensive systems that the humans had never seen before. However, their systems were outdated and malfunctioning after years of neglect. The humans, with their ingenuity and resourcefulness, worked quickly to repair and upgrade the equipment, improving the chances of survival for both races. Lieutenant Mark Harper, the ship's communications officer, had a knack for understanding alien technology. He and a group of Jarkan engineers worked late into the night, repairing energy shields and defensive turrets. While the Jarkan had the knowledge, the humans brought fresh ideas that made the repairs faster and more efficient. "I've never seen anything like this," Mark said as he worked with the Jarkan engineers. "Your technology is impressive, but these systems are ancient. It's no wonder they're malfunctioning." The Jarkan engineer nodded. "We once had the power to defend ourselves from any enemy, but years of isolation have taken their toll." As the humans and Jarkan worked side by side, something remarkable began to happen. The distrust that had initially existed between the two species started to fade. There was no denying that they were different. One species was built for strength, the other for intellect, but their shared purpose created a bond that was growing stronger by the minute. On the battlefield, the humans proved their worth. They didn't have the sheer firepower of the Krath, but they made up for it with strategy and bravery. They used the Jarkan's advanced weaponry in creative ways, turning the tide in several small skirmishes. Humans were adaptable, and their willingness to think outside the box gave them an edge that the Krath hadn't anticipated. In the midst of the fighting, Captain Ava Lawson found herself working closely with Vorten. Together, they formulated battle plans, directing the Jarkan forces and the humans into key positions. Ava was impressed by Vorten's leadership and his calm demeanor under pressure. "We'll hold them off here," Ava said, pointing to a map of the battlefield. "But we need to prepare for a larger assault. The Krath will send reinforcements soon." Vorten nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "You're right. They won't stop until they've taken everything." The first few days of the battle were exhausting, but the alliance between the humans and the Jarkan had proven to be stronger than either side had expected. There were losses, too many to count, but with each victory, the confidence of the humans and Jarkan grew. And with that confidence came the realization that they might have a chance after all. In the evenings, when the fighting subsided, the two groups gathered around makeshift camps. Humans shared stories of their homeworld, and Jarkan warriors spoke of their history. Slowly, an understanding began to form, not just of tactics and strategies, but of each other's cultures and values. Ava sat by a fire one evening, looking at the stars overhead. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew one thing: they couldn't afford to fail. The fate of the Jarkan was now intertwined with the fate of humanity. Together, they would face the Krath, and together, they might just have a chance at victory. The alliance between the humans and the Jarkan was growing stronger, but the fight against the Krath had only just begun. With each passing day, the pressure on both species intensified. The Krath warlord, Krathar, showed no signs of slowing down. His forces were relentless, pushing the Jarkan further back. Yet, as the battle raged on, Captain Ava Lawson found herself more convinced than ever that they had made the right choice in coming to the Jarkan's aid. The humans and Jarkan had worked together to fortify the last remaining stronghold, a large city hidden deep within the mountains. This city, once the pride of the Jarkan, now stood as their final bastion. It was surrounded by steep cliffs, making it difficult for the Krath to reach. But Krathar's forces had come prepared. They were deploying powerful siege weapons and bringing in their most experienced fighters. "We've reinforced the city's outer defenses," Lieutenant Mark Harper said as he looked over the latest reports. "But we don't have enough to hold them off for long. Krathar's army is too strong, and they've got us outnumbered." Ava frowned, her mind racing. It wasn't just the numbers that worried her. The Krath were brutal and cunning. They had already shown their ability to break through every defense the Jarkan had set up, and their siege weapons were unlike anything the humans had ever seen. Yet, Ava refused to give in. She had seen the strength in the hearts of her crew, and she had seen the same determination in the Jarkan. "We're not out of options yet," Ava said, her voice steady. "We need to make them believe they can't win here. If we do that, they'll hesitate. And when they hesitate, that's when we strike." Vorten stood beside Ava, his dark eyes watching her as she spoke. He had learned to trust her leadership over the past few days. "Your plan is risky, but I believe it may work. We must make the Krath think this city is well defended. They will not know that we are outnumbered." Ava turned to him, her expression resolute. "We need every advantage we can get. If we make them believe they'll be walking into a trap, they'll think twice about launching a full-scale attack. We need to create doubt, and then we strike when they least expect it." The plan was set into motion. The humans and the Jarkan worked together to create false defenses. They used their limited resources to rig traps around the city's entrances, and they deployed decoys to make it look like the defenses were much stronger than they actually were. For days, the city seemed to glow with an intimidating energy. an illusion carefully crafted by the combined forces of two races who had learned to work together. When Crathar's forces finally arrived, they were met with the sight of a city that looked like it could withstand anything. Heavy artillery stood at the ready, and the ground trembled with the weight of unseen defenses. The Crath, always confident, hesitated for the first time. They had expected a swift victory, but this wasn't what they had bargained for. "What are they planning?" Crathar growled, watching the city from a distance. His eyes narrowed as he considered the human and Jarkan tactics. They had been clever, but Crathar was no fool. He knew the Jarkan were on the brink of defeat. Still, the appearance of strength made him uneasy. His second-in-command, a brutal Crath warrior named Salter, spoke up. "We should attack now, while they're still uncertain. If we wait, they may surprise us." Crathar's dark eyes glowed as he considered the advice. "No, we will wait. Let them think they have a chance. Once they make their move, we will crush them." The Crath were not as easily fooled as Ava had hoped. While they hesitated, they still held the upper hand in terms of numbers and firepower. But the humans and Jarkan continued to prepare, each one committed to doing whatever it took to protect the city. The night before the expected attack, Captain Ava Lawson stood on a balcony overlooking the city. The mountains loomed large in the distance, their dark silhouettes blending with the night sky. In the distance, she could see the Crath warships flying overhead, their engines glowing like fireflies in the night. "We have to do this," Ava whispered to herself. The weight of the responsibility pressed down on her shoulders. There was no turning back now. As dawn broke, the Crath finally made their move. The ground shook as their forces advanced, sending shockwaves through the city's defenses. But what Crathar didn't know was that the humans had set their own trap in motion. The decoys had drawn the Crath into a false sense of security, and now they were about to pay the price. Ava and Vorten stood side by side, watching the chaos unfold. The Crath had rushed into the city, thinking they could easily break through. But as they pushed deeper into the city, the humans and Jarkan launched their surprise attack. Hidden traps exploded in the streets, sending waves of Crath soldiers into disarray. The once intimidating siege weapons were now being turned against the invaders. "We've got them," Vorten said, his voice filled with confidence. "Now we fight." The battle was brutal. The Crath, caught off guard by the sudden attack, struggled to maintain control. The humans and Jarkan fought side by side, their combined strength proving to be a force Crathar hadn't prepared for. Each blow struck with precision, each move calculated. It was a battle of strategy, strength, and resolve. By the time the sun set, the Crath forces had been pushed back. Though they were not defeated, they had been forced to retreat for the moment. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. "We've made our first stand," Captain Ava Lawson said, breathing heavily as she surveyed the battlefield. "But this war is far from over." The alliance between the humans and Jarkan had proven its worth, and though the battle was just one small chapter in the war, it was a crucial step toward ensuring that both species would survive. The sun rose over the city, casting long shadows over the battlefield. The clash between the humans, the Jarkan, and the Crath had left the ground scarred, but the alliance between the two species had held strong. Despite the small victory, Ava knew that this was just the beginning. The Crath were a relentless force, and they would not let their defeat go unanswered. As the last of the Crath forces retreated, Captain Ava Lawson gathered her officers in the war room. It was a small, dimly lit space deep within the city's underground bunker. Maps covered the walls, showing the layout of the city and the surrounding terrain. The humans and Jarkan had worked together to create a solid defense, but Ava knew that the Crath would return in force. "We've bought ourselves some time," Ava said, looking at the faces of her team. "But the Crath won't just give up. They'll regroup, and they'll come back stronger. We need to be ready for that." Lieutenant Mark Harper nodded in agreement. "They'll be preparing their next move right now. We should assume that they've already learned from their mistakes." Vorten stood at the back of the room, his arms folded. The Krath are not the type to retreat for long. They will return with greater numbers and better tactics. We must be ready to fight until the end. Ava's gaze shifted to the map of the city. The Krath had proven their ability to break through defenses, and now it was clear they would try again. The question was, how could they defend against a larger force? We need to build more traps, fortify the outer walls, and prepare for a siege, Ava said, her mind already working through the details. We can't afford to be caught off guard again. The next few days were spent preparing. The humans and Jarkan worked tirelessly to strengthen the city's defenses. The outer walls were reinforced with stronger materials, and new traps were set up in the streets. The Jarkan, with their advanced technology, worked side by side with the humans to create new weapons and gadgets to help level the playing field. Meanwhile, Ava spent her time organizing the human troops and meeting with Vorten and other Jarkan leaders. They needed to communicate more effectively if they were going to stand a chance against the Krath. They had already made great strides, but the reality was that the Krath outnumbered them, and their siege weapons were far more powerful than anything the humans or Jarkan could create. The odds were stacked against them, but Ava refused to back down. One evening, as the preparations continued, Ava stood on a high balcony overlooking the city. The lights of the city twinkled below her, a reminder of everything they were fighting for. She could hear the sounds of Jarkan soldiers training in the distance, their voices a chorus of determination. She could see the humans working alongside them, proving that their alliance was no mere political gesture. It was something far more powerful. Vorten joined her on the balcony, his expression thoughtful. "We've come far," he said quietly, "but I fear we may not have enough time." Ava turned to face him, her expression fierce. "We'll make the time. We'll buy ourselves more time to prepare, no matter what it takes. If the Krath want this city, they'll have to go through us first." He nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of respect and concern. "I believe in you, Captain Lawson, but we must be ready for their retaliation. They won't stop until they've crushed us." "I know," Ava said, her voice firm, "but that's not going to happen. We fight to win." As the days passed, the Krath began to regroup. Krathar, the ruthless warlord, knew that his previous assault had failed, but he wasn't the type to give up easily. The Krath warships began to gather on the edges of the planet's atmosphere, preparing for another strike. The humans and Jarkan could see the massive warships descending from the sky like dark clouds. Their heavy engines rumbled as they approached, casting an ominous shadow over the city. "They're coming," Mark said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "This is it, the real battle." Ava took a deep breath, her mind racing. This was the moment she had been preparing for. The city was ready, but they had no illusions. The Krath would be brutal, and they would stop at nothing to win. But Ava had a plan. The traps were in place, the weapons ready, and the alliance between humans and Jarkan stronger than ever. She wasn't going to let them down. The city's alarm systems went off, signaling that the Krath had launched their assault. The ground shook as the Krath warships landed outside the city walls, their heavy weapons making a deafening noise as they set up. The Krath began to advance, moving like a tide of darkness, and Ava knew that this was it. There was no turning back now. "We fight now," Ava said, her voice cutting through the tension in the air. "For the city, for our people, for everything we've built." The first wave of Krath soldiers poured into the city, and the trap was sprung. Explosions rocked the streets as the Krath were caught in the blast. But the Krath were not easily defeated. They quickly regrouped, their numbers overwhelming. But Ava was not one to retreat. The humans and Jarkan fought back with everything they had. The battle raged on through the night, with each side pushing and pulling for control of the city. Ava and Vorten stood at the front lines, leading their forces with determination. The city was theirs to protect, and they would not let the Krath take it without a fight. The clash of weapons, the sound of explosions, and the cries of soldiers filled the air. But amidst it all, one thing was clear: they would never give up. The war was far from over, but Ava knew one thing for sure: they would fight until the very end. The war had entered a new phase. The first major battle with the Krath had left the city battered and bruised, but it was still standing. Ava knew that this next wave of attacks would be even worse. The Krath had learned from their first defeat and would come back with more strength, more power, and more fury. The city walls were stronger now, but so were the Krath weapons. It was a constant game of cat and mouse, each side pushing harder than the other, but neither able to deliver a decisive blow. Captain Ava Lawson stood at the center of the command center, surrounded by her most trusted officers. The map of the city was spread out before them, and on it, the marks for the Krath's movements were growing thicker and closer. They could feel the weight of the approaching storm. "We need to keep our cool," Ava said, her voice steady despite the urgency in the air. "We have the upper hand in the city, but that won't last long if we don't stay sharp." Lieutenant Harper looked up from the map. "They're bringing in larger forces this time. We've seen their transport ships taking on more supplies. They're gearing up for something big." Ava nodded. "Then we'll be ready. We've got the traps, the weaponry, and the will to win. All we need now is a plan to keep them from overrunning us." Vorton, standing near the back of the room, spoke up. His voice was calm but full of concern. "The Krath are relentless. They will throw everything at us. We cannot afford to take this lightly." "We won't," Ava replied firmly. "We just need to make sure we keep the pressure on them. If we can disrupt their plans, we might be able to make them retreat again." The tension in the room grew as everyone focused on their tasks. Ava and her team spent the next hours organizing their forces, readying themselves for the oncoming Krath assault. They had built a few new defenses, reinforced others, and increased their patrols around the city's perimeter. The skies darkened as more Krath warships appeared, looming overhead like great predators circling their prey. This time, they were not just making an attack. They were laying siege. Ava stood tall, watching the ships land from the command center's balcony. "This is it," she said, her voice low but full of determination. "The time has come to show them what humans and Jarkan are made of." As the Krath forces began their descent, the city went on high alert. The people of the city, both human and Jarkan, took their places at the front lines. There was no fear in their eyes, just resolve. The Krath might have the numbers, but the humans and Jarkan had something far stronger: unity. In the streets below, Ava saw her soldiers and the Jarkan warriors getting into position. Mark and Vortan were ready to lead the charge. The Krath soldiers began their march toward the walls, their armor gleaming darkly in the light of the warships above. The first wave of Krath soldiers hit the city's defenses with all their might. Explosions rocked the ground as the Krath's powerful siege weapons pounded the walls. For a moment, the city shook, but it did not fall. Ava's heart pounded as she saw the first line of defense hold strong. Ava's voice came through the comms, calm and clear. "Hold your ground. They're strong, but we're stronger. Keep pushing them back." The human soldiers and Jarkan warriors fought with all their strength, matching the Krath blow for blow. For every Krath soldier that fell, 2 more took their place. But the humans and Jarkan were relentless. They fought not only for their own survival, but for the future of all civilizations that had abandoned the Krath. The battle raged through the night, and by the time the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds, the Krath had taken heavy losses. Ava's heart skipped a beat as she saw the retreating Krath forces begin to pull back. "We're pushing them back," Lieutenant Harper shouted as he looked through the binoculars. But Ava knew that this retreat was not a sign of victory. It was simply a tactic. The Krath would regroup, rebuild their strength, and return with even greater force. The war was far from over, but the humans and Jarkan had made a stand. They had shown that they would not be so easily beaten. The Krath had underestimated them, but they would never make that mistake again. Ava and her forces had proven that they were not a race to be abandoned, not a civilization to be forgotten. They were warriors, and they had the will to fight. As the Krath retreated to their ships, their commanders undoubtedly plotting their next move, Ava took a moment to breathe. She looked around at her team, at her soldiers and allies. They had held the line, and they had made a powerful statement. They had shown the galaxy that they would not be abandoned, and they would not fall without a fight. Vorten approached Ava, his expression softening as he saw the relief in her eyes. "You've done well, Captain," he said, his deep voice filled with respect. Ava turned to him, offering a small smile. "We've all done well, but this battle is only one of many. We're not done yet. Not by a long shot." The Krath might have retreated for now, but Ava knew that they would return. And when they did, they would find the humans and Jarkan standing tall, ready for whatever came next. The city had been quiet for 2 days, but the silence was a heavy one. Every soldier, every warrior, and every civilian in the city knew that the Krath were not gone for good. Ava Lawson paced through the command center, her thoughts constantly turning over the same question. When would they strike again? And how could they be ready for it? She could feel the tension in the air, thicker than the smoke that still lingered from the recent battle. The walls of the city had held, but the Krath were no fools. They would be back, and next time, they would be ready. Ava needed to make sure her people were prepared for whatever came. Her mind wandered to her allies, the Jarkan. Together, humans and Jarkan had fought off the Krath once, but that success was not guaranteed a second time. The Krath would learn from their mistakes, and they had the resources to make their next assault much more powerful. The Jarkan warriors, though proud and strong, were few in number compared to the Krath. But their strength wasn't in numbers. It was in their loyalty, their courage, and their honor. Ava had seen that firsthand, from the way Vorten led his people to the fierce determination in their eyes as they stood beside the humans. As Ava continued her walk through the command center, she was joined by Lieutenant Harper and Vorten. The two of them had been with her through thick and thin, and they were the people she trusted most. "Captain," Harper said, breaking the silence, "we've reinforced the city's defenses as much as we can. We've doubled patrols and reinforced the walls with everything we've got, but I'm not sure it'll be enough." "We'll make it enough," Ava replied, her voice unwavering. "The Krath are coming for us, but this time, we're going to fight smarter. We're not just defending. We're going to take the fight to them." Vorten nodded in agreement. "The Jarkan will stand with you. We will not let the Krath break our alliance. We will fight until the very end." Ava looked at them both, feeling the weight of the words they spoke. She didn't want to think about the possibility of failure, but deep down, she knew the odds were slim. The Krath were a relentless force, and if they wanted to wipe out everything Ava and her allies had fought for, they would not hesitate. But Ava couldn't allow herself to give up. The people of the city had put their trust in her, and she would not let them down. She wasn't going to let the Krath destroy her home, her friends, or her allies. The next morning, the tension that had been building for days finally snapped. The sky above the city darkened with the shadows of Krath warships, their massive forms blocking out the sun. The city's alarms went off, signaling the arrival of the enemy. Ava stood at the command center's balcony, looking out at the battlefield below. The city was ready for them. The streets were lined with soldiers, and Jarkan warriors stood shoulder to shoulder with their human allies, preparing for the worst. Every person in the city knew that this would be the final stand. "This is it," Ava said, her voice steady. "We fight for everything we have left, for the people of this city, for the Jarkan, for the future." She turned to Harper and Vorten, both of whom nodded with grim determination. The first wave of Krath forces landed with explosive force, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The Krath were larger this time, more numerous and better equipped. But Ava had a plan. Her forces were well prepared, and the traps they had set in place would catch the Krath off guard. The fighting started almost immediately, loud and violent. Krath warships unleashed their weapons, sending blasts across the battlefield. Humans and Jarkan fought back with everything they had, using every weapon, every tactic they could think of. It was chaos, but in that chaos, Ava saw something amazing. The Jarkan fought with unmatched fury, their weapons glowing as they clashed with the Krath forces. They didn't back down, they didn't flinch. And the humans, too, stood tall, giving everything they had. They fought as one, unified in purpose. Ava felt her heart race as she watched the battle unfold. It wasn't just about holding the city anymore. This was about showing the Krath that they had made a mistake. This was about proving that the people they had written off could stand and fight just as fiercely as any other civilization. The battle raged on for hours, the air filled with the sounds of weapons firing, explosions echoing, and cries of defiance. But Ava never wavered. She kept her focus, directing her soldiers, coordinating attacks, and supporting her allies. And slowly but surely, they started to push the Krath back. The Krath, realizing they couldn't break the city, began to retreat, their forces withdrawing as they attempted to regroup. But Ava knew that this wasn't the end. The Krath would come again. They would never give up until they had taken everything. But for now, the Krath were gone. The city had held. Ava stood tall on the battlefield, a sense of victory filling her chest. But she knew that the fight was far from over. The war wasn't won yet, and the Krath would return. But for today, the humans and Jarkan had shown the galaxy that they could fight, and they could win. The battle had raged for days, but now the skies were clear, and the dust was settling over the ruins of the battlefield. The Krath had retreated, their forces broken and scattered. The city stood strong, but it had come at a great cost. The human and Jarkan forces had fought with everything they had, and many had fallen. Ava Lawson stood at the front of the command center, watching as medics and soldiers tended to the wounded. Her heart was heavy with the loss of so many good people, but she knew they had fought for something greater than themselves. They had fought for freedom, for the future, and for each other. "Captain," Lieutenant Harper said, stepping up beside her, "the Krath are regrouping. We've received intel that they're planning another assault, one that will be even bigger than the last." Ava didn't flinch. She had known this moment would come. The Krath would never stop, not until they had taken everything. But this time, they would be ready. They had learned from the last battle, and they would use that knowledge to strike back harder. "I know," Ava replied, her voice steady. "But we won't be caught off guard again. We'll be ready for them." Just then, Vorton, the Jarkan leader, entered the room. His imposing figure stood tall, but his expression was grim. Despite their victory, the Jarkan had lost many warriors in the fight. They had given everything they had to protect the city, and yet they knew the war was far from over. "The Krath will not rest until they have crushed us all," Vorton said, his voice low but filled with resolve. "But they have underestimated the strength of our alliance. The Jarkan will fight with you until the very end." Ava looked at him, seeing the determination in his eyes. The Jarkan had proven themselves time and time again, and she knew they would stand with the humans no matter what came next. They had become more than allies. They had become family. "We won't let them win," Ava said, her voice filled with the conviction she had carried since the first day of this war. "This is our fight now, and we will stand together." She turned to Harper and Vorton, who both nodded in agreement. The city had shown that it could endure, that it could withstand the forces that sought to destroy it. But the true test was yet to come. The Krath would not stop, and neither would they. The following weeks were spent preparing for the final assault. Every soldier, every Jarkan warrior, and every citizen of the city was involved in the effort. They worked tirelessly, building stronger defenses, training for every possible scenario. and fortifying the city in every way imaginable. But Ava knew that simply defending the city wouldn't be enough. They had to take the fight to the Krath, to show them that they were not going to be defeated. As the days passed, the tension continued to grow. Ava could feel the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders, but she did not allow herself to falter. The people of this city were depending on her, and she would not let them down. Then, one day, the Krath came. Their warships filled the skies, blocking out the sun and casting a shadow over the entire city. Ava stood with her team at the command center, watching as the first wave of Krath forces landed. "Prepare for battle," she ordered, her voice calm but commanding. "This is it. We fight for everything." The ground shook as the Krath advanced, their massive war machines marching toward the city. But this time, the humans and Jarkan were ready. They fought back with everything they had, humans and Jarkan, side by side, defending their homes and their allies. The battle was fierce, but the humans had something the Krath didn't: determination. They fought with a passion that no enemy could match, pushing the Krath back at every turn. The Jarkan fought with equal fury, their weapons striking down any Krath soldier that crossed their path. Hours passed, and the battle raged on, but slowly the Krath forces began to retreat. The humans and Jarkan had taken the fight to them, and they had pushed them back. The Krath were no longer the unstoppable force they had once been. Finally, the last of the Krath ships retreated into the sky, leaving the battlefield in silence. The city had held once again, and the Krath had been defeated, at least for now. Ava stood on the battlefield, her heart racing as the dust settled around her. The war wasn't over, and the Krath would no doubt return. But for now, they had won. For now, they had shown the galaxy that humans and Jarkan would not be so easily crushed. She turned to Vorten, who stood beside her. The two of them shared a moment of silent understanding. They had been through so much together, and they knew that the fight was far from over. But there was hope now, something that hadn't been there before. "We've won today," Ava said softly. "But the war is far from over." Vorten nodded. "But we've shown them what we're made of. And together, we will fight until the end." As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the battlefield, Ava felt a sense of hope rising in her chest. The war was far from over, but they had proven that they could stand against the Krath. They had proven that the strength of their alliance, the strength of their determination, was enough to overcome any enemy. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Ava knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for humanity and the Jarkan. A chapter where they would stand together, united in the face of whatever the galaxy threw their way.